What's going on, guys, and welcome back. It's been a little bit of a sketchy week. Both my kids had been sick. We've been doing some live things on Whatnot and other fun things, going back on there again later with some first chapter. But anyway, today we're going to talk about 3 decks that are doing well and 3 decks that are starting to slip a little bit. I wanted to keep this more to meta decks. We're not necessarily going to jump in card by card and break it on down, but the first deck we are going to mention, Old School Discard. This deck is actually on the rise. We've been seeing it start to get a few more tops here and there, and I wonder if people are just like, we kind of broke one of these down the other day, and like, the deck is really good, and why do we need to continue trying to play the newer version, which runs a much higher uninkable count, when the old version still works just fine? Even the newer version is seeing more success right now. Just overall, Green Steel Discard is trending upwards. It's still in that tier 2 range, but it is starting to move up, and we'll see if it can't make a tier 1 push as the format comes to a close. But overall, Green Steel Discard is starting to see more play, so unfortunately, guys, I know most of you probably hate playing against this deck, but it's gaining popularity, it's doing better, and don't be surprised coming up at set championships if you continue to see Green Steel Discard moving forward. Going on into the next one now, Blurple, another deck that was very hot into set championships. It's actually seeing a decline. Blurple is on the decline. It's still strong in that tier 2 range. It's actually a little higher than Emerald Steel Discard at the moment as well. But we saw it peak as high as 9%, getting so close to pushing tier 1. And it's starting to come down towards that 7% range. Now again, the deck is just not necessarily bad. Doesn't mean you can't play it. I still love this deck, and it would probably be my first choice for an event. However, it's starting to see a little bit of a trend downwards, and that's how formats go. Formats change, develop, rotate a little bit up and down. We see peaks, we see lows, we see things change. They speed up, they slow down, and it's kind of a neat revolving door of how the format works. And Blurple's just at the moment on a downward swing, and you never know when it's going to all of a sudden come flying right back up. But overall, Blurple, I still think, has a pretty solid spot in this meta. I think it's just it's difficult to pilot, especially if you're into a variety of decks, because there's a lot of tech and space that you can try to put for things, but at the same time, it's hard to tech for everything. So if you're in a very diverse meta, it's kind of hard to do it effectively. Whether you go with the 10 1-drops or fewer 1-drops, your location pick, whether it's Library, McDuck Manor, or Queen's Castle, things like that. Obviously, coming down to like Let It Goes, do you play Donald, don't you? There's a lot of flexibility to the deck, and overall, I still think it's strong, but it is on a downward swing. Popsicle, you should know this one is trending upward. It just got first and second, and it also took, was it 7 out of the top 16 spots at the DLC, something like that in Melbourne. Popsicle not only was already the #1 deck, it's trending upwards, and obviously, this isn't the first place list because we already went over that deck list in a separate video. So this was grabbed from a set championship that took second place. Still seeing the super goof in there though, a lower character count, and McDuck Manor's making their place, as well as the Pirate's Life, to really close out their games. This deck is just super consistent and really takes advantage of the Maui Half Shark. And it's such a strong deck. This deck is so insanely good that I'm not surprised that it's still peaked at #1, but it's actually trending upwards. As hard as that may be to believe, a lot of time a deck just hits that peak and it's like, okay, I'm here, I'm just going to continue going. But we're seeing Popsicle still continue to push that ceiling a little bit higher and trend upward as a deck. Naturally, when Popsicle's trending upwards, Steel Song is trending down. It was in tier 1 a couple weeks ago, and now it's starting to teeter on down. It's coming down below. It's no longer the #1 tier 2 deck even. It's into that 8% range. We've seen it as high as 12% this format. Or I should say this set championship format. First week of set champions, it was actually doing pretty well. It's got a good toolbox. It just has a very poor Popsicle matchup, and maybe that means Steel Song players just need to tech into that matchup more, because they handle aggro already decently well, and it's just a matter of finding the right combination of cards. And once this deck figures that out, I think that there's so much potential for it and that it really can do well. But like I said, anytime Popsicle's just that #1 overall threat, especially if Popsicle's all over in your meta, it's just very difficult for Steel Song to really get its feet under it and get rolling with it. Number 3 deck, trending back upwards. I mentioned this at the end of last week that it was the deck I said to keep an eye out on, and guess what? It's trending upward. It has overtaken no, it hasn't quite overtaken. We went with 3. Amethyst Emerald Tempo has overtaken Steel Song as the #1 tier 2 deck, but it didn't really trend upwards. It just held stagnant where Blurple and Steel Song both dropped. Amethyst Emerald kind of held steady where it was, but we see Amethyst Steel is trending upwards, being just a nice aggressive deck that can also kind of pivot into a mid-range. You're not like full-blown trying to go mid-range, but the deck doesn't necessarily have to win by like turn 5 like a hyper aggro strategy. And this exact list on the screen is much more aggressive than some other ones. You might see things like Big Tink in there, John Silver, other slightly slower cards, but not quite like full-on mid-game type cards. It's still an aggressive deck at nature, but overall, this is just one of those decks, too, that you just really can't sleep on. It's got a lot of good things going for it, lots of good toolbox, and it can be fast. It can be, I don't want to say slow, but, you know, in that mid-game, not just outright lose because you don't win in those first couple turns like some other aggressive strategies tend to do. One more deck trending downward. Ruby Amethyst is actually trending downward. It's at 14%, and it does still sit as the second best deck in the format overall for set championships. However, we saw this deck as high as like 18%, and it's continuing just going down slowly. DLC Melbourne, this deck underperformed tremendously. The North American Continentals, the deck took first, but outside of that, it performed overall very poorly. Part of, I think, why these last couple weeks have been very rough on this deck is because it won Continentals, and I think a lot of people gravitated towards that list, and that list was heavily teched for the event, and I think a more standardized list overall would be stronger. This was a top 64 list from DLC Melbourne. Just seeing some of the kind of trends, still seeing the 4 Lady Tremaines in there, however not going full-blown like that other list. No Genies, but we do have the Elsas and Mauis. Kind of like Steel Song. I think it just needs to get its feet under it, and people need to experiment to get the right combination of cards going. And once they do that, I think that this deck is going to be right back in it and have a very strong spot in the meta. It's just too consistent and toolboxy not to, but overall, that's kind of where Ruby Amethyst is at. It's trending downward, guys. But again, just because these 3 decks are trending down doesn't mean we can't all of a sudden ride that wave and come right back up on the other side. And just because a deck's trending upward doesn't mean it's going to stay up there. 2 weeks ago, Steel Fossa, if we had a little pie chart as far as tops go, Steel Fossa went so high up 2 weeks ago and came crashing right back down last week. So just because a deck's up 1 week doesn't mean it's going to be up the next week. What do I expect going into this weekend? Actually, a trending downward deck that I was going to put, I ended up sticking to like higher tier type decks. Baja Blast, what happened to that deck? Thought it was supposed to be insanely strong. I didn't really think it would be. I was kind of thought once it was figured out, it was more of a wow surprise factor. Just overall, Baja Blast. It did get top 64 in Melbourne though, so I do want to point that out. And it has done some set championships where it's done well. Overall though, I think that deck is kind of gimmicky and too reliant on muses. But when it hits, that deck might have the highest ceiling in the entire game. When that deck hits, it absolutely hits. Like I said, another really safe pick that if you want would be Amethyst Emerald. I think this is a strong week for Amethyst Emerald. That's my pick if I had to. We'll throw a deck profile up for Amethyst Emerald tomorrow and what I would play if I were to go to set championships this weekend with that deck, and I'll break it down for you guys. But that's going to be my pick for this week. Let's see. Can I go 3 for 3? I said Steel Fossa. They had a crazy weekend. I said Purple Steel. They shot upwards. Now I'm calling Amethyst Emerald. Let's see if I can go 3 for 3 predicting decks to do really, really well. And actually the first week I called Blurple, and it did a really good first week. So we're 3 for 3 going for 4 for 4 on the weekend, trying to predict which deck is going to just pop up and be all over the place. Let's see if we can't do it, guys. Thanks for watching. Don't forget, 5,500 subscriber giveaway, as always, is going to be live until we hit it. We're not going to turn it off. There's no deadline. Nothing like that. Once we hit 5,500 subscribers, period, case giveaway. Thanks for watching, guys, and as always, take care.